All right, in this lesson, we will be evaluating bias of some of the documents that are in your document packet. So you can have your document packet in front of you, and as I talk about a document, you can flip to that document, and then I'm going to ask the substitute to pause after I ask the questions about each document so that you can discuss with the people around you the potential bias within each document. You are going to be required to evaluate the bias of at least 2 documents in your essay. So you don't have to evaluate the bias for every document that you use, but you do need to evaluate it for at least 2. If you want to get a super high score like a 4, however, with regards to perspective and bias, you're going to need to evaluate the bias of more than 2 documents, of every document where it seems appropriate. So let's start with document S. In document S, a Byzantine citizen discusses how the Crusaders came to Constantinople and looted, raped, and murdered the citizens of the city. Based on this limited information, do you think that this source is reliable? Why or why not? We're going to pause here so that you can discuss it. All right, now that we've discussed this in pairs, I'm going to talk a little bit about and these are some things that hopefully some of you discussed. So, in this case, the Byzantine might be biased. He might be biased against the Crusaders and portray them as worse than they actually are. He might be resentful or angry at something that the Crusaders did when they came to Constantinople. And so we probably do need to find another document that would back up what is being said in this document. That being said, the Byzantine in question, it seems like he was actually there. He was actually discussing something that he saw with his own eyes. As a result, he will take it very seriously when somebody says that they said something themselves. That in fact they might have actually seen something. It's probably based on some type of reality. So again, while you want to take a look at other documents, maybe you could take a look at secondary sources, to determine whether or not historians have agreed in terms of consensus that that actually happened. A little on paper copy here in class. And so you want to back it up, but Here's what I think. I think that humans are deeply tribal individuals, that we tend to identify with our own. And so here is a European Christian criticizing his fellow European Christians and how his fellow European Christians are acting towards the Jews. And this is in a time period, in an era, in which, there's none of this diversity stuff. There's none of this, teach tolerance type of thing, right? I mean, we're in a time period where there's really very little religious toleration. And yet this European Christian is criticizing his fellow Christians. That's a big deal. That really tells us that something very serious might have been going on in medieval Europe against the Jews, when even European Christians are despairing at how Europeans are treating the Jews. So I would take this. documents F and G. So in these two documents, two different European crusaders talk about how many people they killed during the First Crusade. One talks about how they killed women and men, and one talks about how they killed people regardless of their age. Are you willing to believe them that the Europeans engaged in indiscriminate slaughter? Indiscriminate means they don't care who they killed or who they didn't kill. Why or why not? So we're going to pause right now, and then when we restart, I'll give you my thoughts. Okay, so I think that these documents do in fact show that the Crusaders were very murderous and that they were killing everybody in sight. Did they kill as much as they said they did? Did they kill so much that they were wading up to their ankles in blood? That seems hard to believe, but it might have happened. But because you have two different European crusaders, like kind of bragging about the same thing, even if they didn't engage in as much slaughter as they were bragging about, that does tell you something about the European crusaders and their mindset. I mean, their mindset was definitely that they should be proud of how many people they killed, and that they shouldn't try to hide that. And so that is really interesting in terms of when we think about the Crusaders' mindset and we think about, how the Crusaders were viewing violence and how violent they were during the Crusades. All right, let's go on to the next document. So now we're talking about document B. In document B, the Pope is talking about all of the horrible things the Muslims are doing to Christian pilgrims. We must note that the Pope has never been to the Middle East. Are you more or less likely to believe his assertion that the Muslims are committing atrocities? Why or why not? I would ask you in your discussions to remember that this is one of the documents that, while it wasn't written directly after his speech, it was written a few years later, this is one of the documents that Europeans used to figure out why they went on crusades, what the justifications were for going on the crusades. So my question is, do you believe him that the Muslims are committing these atrocities? Why or why not? I'm going to pause it. Okay, so now that we've discussed it, here are my thoughts. I think that you should be very suspicious of this document. One of the reasons why you should be suspicious is because the Pope had never been to the Middle East, so everything that he's getting is going to be secondhand. So we need to take a look at other perspectives, other ideas about what's going on. Now, I haven't given you any of the other documents that take place before the Crusades. So you can use your textbook, or you could use the secondary sources to provide background about what was actually happening before the Crusades with regards to the Muslims and how they were treating Christian pilgrims. There were some atrocities. There is very little historical doubt about that. Most historians agree that Muslims were at one point killing Christian pilgrims. But most historians also assert that by the time of the actual Crusades, most of these attacks, at least by the official political authorities, had stopped. While there was some violence still against Christian pilgrims, mostly those were unorganized and done by criminals rather than by the government. And so the Pope was kind of claiming that Muslims as a whole were attacking Christian pilgrims, and it looks like by the time he actually gets around to giving the speech, that is no longer true. We don't know whether or not he was purposefully falsifying the evidence or whether or not he was just using outdated letters. But we do have additional reason to be suspicious because you could see this document as a type of propaganda, because it's a call for the Crusades. He's trying to get people to give up their everyday lives, to sacrifice everything and go on crusade. And so he really needs to convince them that this is the right thing to do. So he's liable to exaggerate the facts in order to encourage people to actually give up everything and go on crusade. All right, let's go on to the next document. In document A, Pope Urban II argues that the European leaders are acting poorly and causing violence in Europe. Are you likely to believe him? Why or why not? I'm going to pause it there. Okay, so I think that this is a really interesting question, right? Pope Urban II is on the same quote-unquote team as these other Europeans. Nevertheless, we do know that in European society, there were different groups of people vying for power. You have the political leaders on one hand, and you have the church leaders on the other hand. In document A, you see him saying basically like, leave the church's stuff alone. Don't mess with church affairs. Leave our property alone. Don't tax the church, and these types of things, right? So to a certain extent, while it may be true that European leaders did in fact act poorly towards their, that European leaders did act poorly and treated people badly and those types of things, Pope Urban II may be specifically saying this in order to get the European leaders to feel guilty about what they're doing so that they go on crusade and leave him alone, and basically help him to consolidate his power within Europe. So to a certain extent, some of these things could be seen as his way of basically saying, European leaders, stop fighting amongst each other, stop the crime, go to the Middle East, and leave me with all the power. Because Pope Urban II isn't the one who's going on crusade, he's sending other people on crusade. Okay, and I think that's it for the documents. So remember, you're going to need to analyze at least 2 documents for bias in your paper. And you can use it in a jujitsu paragraph or in other ways in which you say, well, it looks like this document is really biased, but in fact, it can be really backed up with this document because this document has a lot, this document is from a completely different perspective. Or you can say, this document looks biased and this document might also be biased, but if you put them together, you're more likely to believe it. Or you could say, this document is really biased and here we have other documents that refute it or secondary sources that go against it, and therefore this document, while it could be used against my argument, is in fact a really bad document. Okay. If you're confused about any of this or if you need a refresher on bias, I will be posting this on my website, so go take a look. Thank you.